Welcome everyone to the Monday edition of Fair Territory. We're going to cover the last day of the regular season, the extended regular season. We're going to talk about the American League playoff matchups as well for the wild card round. And I am going to give you my 5 favorite playoff games that I've ever covered since I began my career 37 years ago. So let's get started. Let's start with what is going on Monday, because it's a little bit of an unusual circumstance to say the least. We've got 10 of the 12 playoff spots set. We've got 3 teams still eligible for the final 2 berths, and we've got the Mets and Braves playing a rescheduled doubleheader starting in the East at 1:10. So, in Game 1, we're going to see Spencer Schwellen back for the Braves, Tyler McGill for the Mets, and in Game 2, depending on what happens, it's scheduled to be Chris Sale versus Luis Severino, but we're not going to see Chris Sale versus Luis Severino. The problem with this entire scenario, as I wrote today in The Athletic, is that the final 2 playoff berths here are going to be determined by a doubleheader in which the winner of Game 1 will have 0 incentive to win Game 2. This is the situation that has been created here by this rescheduling. You also had a circumstance on Sunday. 2 teams that have already clinched home field for the wild card series, they had no incentive to win because by not winning, by losing their games respectively, they could have created and helped create a situation where this doubleheader was necessary. So this is a product of the expanded playoffs, of increasingly volatile weather that led to Hurricane Helene perhaps, and in this case, it's also a product of the league failing to take proactive measures. Now, hindsight is 2020, I get it, but a lot of people were saying this a week ago. What are we doing here? And there were 2 solutions available to the league. One was to play the Braves-Mets series earlier in the week. Monday, 1 game, doubleheader Tuesday, when the series was supposed to begin. The other solution was to shift to a neutral site. That decision, though, would have been necessary on Sunday afternoon if you were going to pull that off, because the Mets were playing on Sunday Night Baseball. And frankly, at that point, the league wasn't so sure about the weather forecast. Now, we can say we knew what was going to happen, but as I wrote, I've covered enough games over the years to know that weather forecasts can be tricky, can change. The league gambled. They gambled and they lost. And the point of what I wrote today was that this can never happen again. What we will see this afternoon is almost inevitably a split that will knock the Diamondbacks out of the playoffs, because at that point, all 3 teams will have identical records, and the Diamondbacks do not hold a tiebreaker over either the Mets or the Braves. So, no one should cry for the Diamondbacks. They went 2-5 down the stretch. They also blew an 8-0 lead to the Brewers on September 22nd. No one should cry for the Mets or Braves either, because if you had 1 more games earlier, you wouldn't be in this position. But back to the doubleheader. We all love chaos this time of year. We all kind of relish it. It's cool. But not this kind of chaos. Not this kind of artificially created situation that, again, potentially could have been avoided. Now, I'll repeat, and this needs to be said again. This was a tricky situation. You kind of had to have your real thinking cap on to figure it out in advance. But where we ended up was with the worst case scenario. Now, we can argue all day long about who deserves the greater percentage of blame for not rescheduling initially, the Mets, the Braves, the league. It doesn't matter at this point. The league should have been the entity to take control. The league had the authority to do something that would have prevented this kind of scenario from taking place. And the point of what I wrote again was that the league in the future needs to take steps to ensure this kind of thing never happens again. Okay, let's get to the part of the show now where we talk about actual playoff games that we know are going to take place. And this concerns the American League side of the bracket. We have the 2 wildcard matchups set, and they are going to be 2 fascinating series. You know the wildcard round, it goes best of 3. We have Orioles-Royals, and we have Astros versus the Tigers, the surprising, gritty Tigers. The Orioles situation is improving, and they didn't play well in the second half of the season. We all know that. But they did win 7 of their last 10, and they did have some injured players come back. Jordan Westburg and Ramon Urias on the position player side, two relievers, Jacob Webb, Danny Coulombe. They're in a better spot now than I probably thought they would be 10 days ago, and they'll be at home in this series against the Kansas City Royals. They will go Burns and Eflin, probably Dean Kramer if a Game 3 is necessary. The Royals will go Cole Reagans, Seth Lugo, and Michael Wacha if necessary in Game 3. This series will feature a rematch of the 2014 ALCS. It will also feature a matchup of the two great shortstops in the game right now, two of the great young shortstops. Of course, I'm talking about Bobby Witt Jr. for the Royals and Gunnar Henderson for the Orioles. One other interesting thing to note here. The Royals bullpen with Lucas Erceg has gotten much better. That was a guy the Orioles needed to trade for, right? They traded for Sir Anthony Dominguez and they traded for Gregory Soto. It hasn't worked out so great. That's going to be the big question for the Orioles in this series, and if they go forward, how can they survive with a bullpen that really is problematic? The Royals, not great always either, but with Erceg, they've certainly stabilized things. One other thing to watch here, the status of Vinny Pasquantino. He's been out since August 29th. The Royals offense has cratered without him. He's got a fractured left thumb. He is going to try to take batting practice today and see where he is, see if he can play in this series. If he can play, even if he's somewhat compromised, and I expect he would be after missing a month, that would be a big boost to the Royals. The other series, Astros versus Tigers. This one is interesting in any number of ways as well. You've got a team that has gone to 7 straight American League Championship Series, won 2 World Series in that span. That's the Houston Astros. You've got another team that has not gone to the playoffs in 10 years, that has only 2 players on its roster that have ever appeared in a postseason game. I'm talking about Matt Verling and Kenta Maeda, and a team that traded away the guys that it had that did play in the playoffs or had more postseason experience. Jack Flaherty, Mark Canha, they released Gio Urshela, and on it goes. The Tigers are one of the great stories of this season. They went 35-10 down the stretch before losing their final 2 games. They are a team that right now is hot. It's believing in itself, and yet they're running into, of course, the Houston Astros, who are the bug that cannot be killed. The Astros' question here is Yordan Alvarez. Like Pasquantino with the Royals, will he play with that sore knee that he has? If he does, he'll be a DH, and that means you'll have Dubon in left field or Jason Hayward, possibly Chas McCormick if he is healthy enough. Obviously, the Houston offense is a different animal entirely when Yordan Alvarez is part of it. He's one of the great hitters in the game today. He will get top 10 MVP votes. He's a guy that can transform a game. We've seen it happen in the postseason before. So Alvarez reportedly had a good workout yesterday. He'll take BP today as well, and we'll see what happens here. The Tigers, they've got Tarek Skubal going in Game 1, and who knows what they'll do in Game 2. They've been running kind of a chaotic pitching staff for the last 2 months. If they get through this series, and I don't expect they will, but if they do, then they go into the division series. Skubal would likely be lined up for Game 2 and a potential Game 5 because of the off days. Could they steal one there? Who knows? This is an interesting team to watch right now. I don't know how they'll react to being in the postseason, but they've essentially been playing playoff games for 2 months, and they've done just fine. So congratulations to the Tigers again. What they pulled off is amazing. What the Royals pulled off, coming off 106 losses, is amazing as well. And here we go on Tuesday. Time now for the Inside Dish, the part of the show where I talk about maybe a story I've written, maybe a trend in the game, or a part of the show where maybe I take a stroll down memory lane. And that's what I'm going to do today. Take a stroll into my deep, dark past. Not really. Actually, what I'm going to do is talk about my 5 favorite postseason games that I have ever covered. Now, not all were for Fox, not all were for The Athletic. My career began in 1987. That was the first World Series I ever covered. So let's go. We'll count them down 5-1. And we will start with 2015, Game 5 of the division series between the Blue Jays and the Rangers. Now, this one I was covering for Fox. This was the bat flip game, the legendary Jose Bautista bat flip game. I remember this series. None of us at Fox was particularly excited about it. These were 2 teams kind of on the rise, but not all that sexy. Well, the series turned into a total Donnybrook. It was amazing. It was one of the best series I've ever covered. MLB.com had a great account of Game 5. and they said, quote, "Do you remember the bizarre play when Russell Martin threw his relay to the pitcher of Shin-Soo Choo's bat, enabling Rougned Odor to come home for a controversial go-ahead Texas run? How about when the Rangers committed 3 straight errors to begin the bottom half, or when Josh Donaldson's pop fly landed just past Odor's glove, or when the benches emptied twice after Bautista's bat flip?" That was just Game 5. Legendary game. Of course, it will go down in Toronto sports lore forever. All right, number 4 on my list. This was a tough one. I chose between several games at the old Yankee Stadium, and I was leaning toward 2001. Game 4 in particular, that was the 9/11 series, the post-9/11 series. There was a ton of emotion surrounding the Diamondbacks and Yankees and what was going on, of course, in New York at the time. Former President Bush threw out the first pitch in Game 3. That was an emotional moment. And Game 4 was the first of 2 games in which the Diamondbacks' Byung-Hyun Kim allowed a tying homer in the 9th inning with 1 out to go. Game 4 was won by Derek Jeter. That was the Mr. November game. If you remember, the series was delayed by what happened on 9/11. Jeter became Mr. November that night. Now, I was going to choose that game, but instead I'm going with another legendary game from the old Yankee Stadium. Game 7, 2003 ALCS. I was covering this one for the Sporting News. That was, of course, the Aaron Boone game. And if you remember, the Red Sox were 6 outs away from going to the World Series when Grady Little left Pedro Martinez in the game. Pedro was tiring. Of course, it backfired. And I'll never forget Peter Gammons, then with ESPN, walking through the press room at Yankee Stadium, this decrepit room underneath the stands. It was kind of a germ factory. And Peter's walking through the room after the game saying, "Grady's going to get fired. Grady's going to get fired." Sure enough, Grady got fired. Aaron Boone, of course, that was the most legendary moment of his career. That offseason, he blew out his knee. That's what led to the Yankees' acquisition of Alex Rodriguez. And of course, Grady Little's firing led to the hiring of Terry Francona. And the next year, well, Red Sox fans certainly know what happened in 2004. All right, number 3 on my list, and I cannot believe this game is number 3 because it is one of the great games in World Series history. Game 6 of the 2011 World Series. By this point, I was at Fox, and this game was incredible. Rangers and Cardinals, you remember it, twice. In the 9th inning and the 10th inning, the Cardinals rallied from 2-run deficits. David Freese triple over Nelson Cruz's head. That was one of the tying hits. And then you had the Josh Hamilton go-ahead homer in the 10th. And the Cardinals tie it up again. And then in the 11th, David Freese with the walk-off. Joe Buck with the legendary call. The call that recalled his father Jack Buck's call in the 1987 World Series when Kirby Puckett hit the walk-off homer in the Metrodome. Jack Buck said, "We will see you tomorrow night." Joe Buck said, "We will see you tomorrow night." It gave me chills just being on that broadcast, hearing Joe say those words. Freeze, great interview afterward. It was one of my all-time favorite interviews. Just a magical night. All right, moving forward. Number 2 on my list. This one I can't believe is number 2. Game 7, 2016 World Series. Cubs over the then Indians, 8-7 in 10 innings. Of course, this was the Cubs' first World Series win in quite a long time, as everyone remembers. And, of course, we had a lot of drama in this game. Rajai Davis, the game-tying 2-run homer off Chapman in the 8th. That was a controversial move, pitching Chapman a 3rd straight day. Joe Madden made a number of curious decisions. And then the 17-minute rain delay in the 10th, leading to the emotional meeting with Jason Hayward underneath the stands outside the clubhouse. That's me getting doused by Bill Murray after the game in the Cubs winning clubhouse. And the Cubs go on to win. Hayward, that will go down in Cubs lore, of course. The other thing I remember about this night, and this is a message for young writers out there, I wrote a crappy story. And I wrote a crappy story for a lot of reasons that we don't need to go into, but I didn't give it my best effort. That will never happen again. On that night, you have to give your absolute best effort. And I had some things going on, and I just choked. Not good. I remember that as well, very vividly, actually. All right, number 1 on my list. You might be saying, Ken, well, if you didn't have Game 7, 2003, you didn't have Game 7, 2016, where are we going here? We're going with 1991, the World Series between the Twins and the Braves. One of the greatest games ever played in this sport. There is Jack Morris. You see him, 10 scoreless innings in this game. I was covering for the Baltimore Evening Sun. It was my first year as a columnist. John Smoltz was also brilliant in this game. 7 1/3 scoreless innings. Gene Larkin sac fly to win it in the end. And I'll never forget also the post-game news conference with Twins manager Tom Kelly. And in the post-game news conference, this was a news conference with maybe, 100 writers or more in attendance. It was a different time. Every big newspaper covered the World Series back then, and a lot of little newspapers did as well. And I asked the question that got the best answer I've ever received. It might have been the best question I ever asked in retrospect. And the question I asked was, what would it have taken to remove Jack Morris from this game? The question was asked of Twins manager Tom Kelly. And again, I asked Tom, what would it have taken to get Jack Morris out of this game? Kelly looked at me, never wavered in his facial expression, and said, a shotgun. That was my favorite moment of my favorite World Series. That was a great World Series. If you guys remember, those of you who were of a certain age, that World Series had 5 games decided by 1 run, another World Series decided by 3, and then there was one other blowout, but every night was electric. And Game 7 in the Metrodome, the loud, rollicking Metrodome, was the most electric of all. Jack Morris, an unforgettable performance, an unforgettable night, and those are my top 5 postseason memories. We'll be right back after a word from AJ Przinsky, Eric Kratz, and Scott Braun.
We get it. Mornings are nuts. No time for breakfast, but you need to get your day started right.
What if a delicious, nutritious meal could be ready in seconds? Support for Foul Territory is brought to you by Huel, the world's #1 complete nutrition brand. With over 400 million meals sold worldwide, Huel is trusted by millions of people looking to fuel their days with convenient, complete nutrition. Try it for yourself with this exclusive FT offer. 15% off with the code FOUL at Huel.com.
You know we're all about saving time, but we get hangry, like a lot. I recently fell in love with the Huel Ultimate Super Greens Powder, which is a perfect blend of 91 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. I also love their complete nutrition bars, and those hot and savory pouches are fire too.
FT fam, give it a shot. Get 15% off with the code FOUL at HUEL.com. Unlock a healthier, easier way to eat with Huel. Nutritionally complete meals in minutes so you can focus on what really matters.
Time now for Grillin Ken, the part of the show where I answer your questions. Let's get right to them. The first question today comes from You Don't Know Show, okay? And the question is, could the AAA champions have beaten the White Sox in a series? Now stop it with this stuff. I know the White Sox set the all-time record for losses in a season, 121, but the difference between AAA and the major leagues is vast. And actually, as I've written and others have written too this season, the difference has never been greater. So you can't take a AAA team and expect them to beat the White Sox. You can take the 29 other major league teams and expect them to beat the White Sox, but no, not a AAA team. Sorry. All right, the next question comes from, let's see what we have here, Brian Imicus, who asked, the St. Louis Cardinals appear to be hitting the reset button. What kind of market, if any, would Sonny Gray, Nolan Arenado, and Wilson Contreras have this winter? Brian, good question. And first of all, they don't appear to be hitting the reset button. They are hitting the reset button, as the Athletic's Katie Wu reported several days back. And you ask an interesting question because I imagine that the Cardinals will listen on all 3 of these guys. So let's look at their contractual situations and start there. Arenado, 3 years, $64 million left, including deferrals. The Rockies are paying some of that. That's the obligation that Arenado's team has, the obligation the Cardinals have right now, and the next team, if he has a next team, will as well. Wilson Contreras, 4 years, $62 million. Sonny Gray, 2 years, $65 million left, including a 2027 buyout that is worth $5 million. Arenado and Gray, full no-trade clauses. Contreras, a full no-trade through 2026, so he effectively has one too. These guys are all in their mid-30s. Gray's going to be 35 next season. Arenado 34. Contreras 33. Gray had a good year, not one of his best years, a good year. Arenado offensively was barely above league average this season. And Wilson Contreras is still a really dynamic hitter. So I imagine that if the Cardinals want to move any or all of them, they can do it. I would think they probably would have to eat money on Arenado, probably all 3 actually. But this is going to be something to watch this offseason for sure, because the Cardinals are moving in a direction more toward player development, less of an emphasis on the major league club. All right, let's get to the last question. This one comes from Carlos, who asks, if the Blue Jays fail to extend Vladimir Guerrero Jr., will they entertain trading him this offseason? This, too, is an interesting question. Now, the Blue Jays have maintained for quite some time now that they're going for it in 2025, the last year of club control that they have with Guerrero Jr. and with Bo Bichette. And presumably, with that stance, they do not intend to trade either of those players. At the same time, let's say they do exactly what Carlos outlines here and make another run at extending Vlad Jr. this offseason. And he says no. Let's say they think the offer is fair and they know at that point that Vlad Jr. will leave as a free agent. Honestly, I think we know it at this point, but let's play this out. So at that circumstance, at that point of time, do the Blue Jays say, okay, that's it, we're done? I don't see it based on what they've said so far. They seem prepared to let Guerrero Jr. and Bichette walk at the end of 2025 when they're planning this great season. Good luck to them. I don't understand what the thought process is here. You've got these guys. Granted, you might not get a lot for them because they only have 1 year of control left, but you'll get more than the draft pick that ultimately a qualifying offer would bring. So I've thought the Blue Jays' strategy with these two players and in general has been curious the entire season, and I still think it, but we'll see what happens in the end. All right, I want to thank everyone for watching, everyone for listening, everyone for their questions as well. You know where to find us, YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Subscribe to us, like us. We will be back Thursday at 12:30 Eastern with another show, the one I host every week with Alana Rizzo. Enjoy the wild card round. We'll talk to you soon.
BetMGM first bet $1,500 offer when you use the bonus code FOUL. Get this offer when you download the BetMGM Sportsbook app or at BetMGM.com. Sign up, enter that bonus code FOUL, and deposit at least $10 into your new account. Place your first wager and receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets. If the bet loses, if the bet does lose, your bonus bets will be available once your initial wager is settled. Gambling problem or concern? Don't worry, there's help. Call 1-800-GAMBLER.